If you want to go hard in the yard, you gotta check out this card.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, Ian, and today we're going to be talking about Modern Horizons 2. Not just the set in general, but a retrospective, seeing which cards from the set actually ended up being performers or underperformers in the CEDH format.
Before we go any further, though, I want to talk quickly about our sponsors. They are TCG Player, they are Dragon Shield, and they are your support from viewers like you over on Patreon. So whenever you purchase your cards and accessories, be sure to buy them from TCGplayer.com. They give some of the best prices on the internet, and you still get to support local game stores in the process. Whenever you receive it, make sure to protect it with Dragon Shield. They are the best in the business when it comes to quality, and PWP has been using them to protect our stuff forever. Also, this content comes from the support of viewers like you over on Patreon. We have all kinds of benefits for our patron, including Patreon meetup days, Discord access, webcam tournaments, webcam leagues, and just a ton of other stuff. So make sure to check that out, and we hope to see you over there.
And one lucky patron gets a shout out today, so thank you very much to Adam Milo. You helped to make this podcast a reality.
Thank you very much, Adam.
All right, so for today's main topic, we're going to talk about a retrospective of Modern Horizons 2. Now, to break down what we're going to be doing today, we are basically going to be rating the hype level of the cards from Modern Horizons 2, how people in the community and how we personally reacted to these cards. And now that we are months after the set's release, we are looking at them from a what actual legitimate impact have they had on the CEDH format, and maybe things that are still being slept on, things that are being overplayed at the current moment because they're still very new and exciting. And we're going to talk about all of that now with time and a more educated focus on it.
Yep, definitely. So when you first start out with a new set that gets spoiled, mostly a lot of conjecture just goes into it.
Yes.
So you're kind of thinking of how it will be, and there are plenty of times when just as you get out into the wild, you start putting these into your decks, you start to see certain things maybe doing a little bit better than you thought before, and or just maybe doing a lot worse than you thought before. I can't tell you the amount of times I've looked at a spoiled card and I said, this card is so busted, it breaks this deck wide open, it's the best thing ever. And then like it's just complete garbage, and you're like, well, I was really wrong about that because it's super easy to play around, or it's just a dead card. Anyway, I could go on about my horrible takes all day long, but we're not going to do that.
One of my favorite parts about that time in the content sphere is always the overhype thumbnails where people are like, everything's on fire, or this is perfect.
Yeah, exactly. It's like best new card in the format. This breaks this wide open. XYZ win con is no longer viable, or something. It's just something ridiculous every time. So it's
so true.
It's a really fun time to look at content creators out there and see what they do. A lot of surprised faces in the thumbnails.
Guilty.
Like that. Yeah, you are one of many. It does. We do it because it works. Okay, it works. You don't click on the thumbnails, we won't do the pretend surprise face anymore. Simple as that. So.
Awesome. So the first cards we're going to be talking about for this review are the cards that we're just calling our appropriate hype level cards, where people evaluated them one way and they actually did it.
Yep, they weren't higher or lower. They were, someone said, hey, this card we think will do this, and it does exactly that. It doesn't overperform or underperform. Or if we did overperform it, we did say it was super hyped, it actually did do what it said it was going to do.
Exactly.
So they were just exactly where everyone thought they were going to be.
Right. The first one of these cards, I think super obvious to anyone who's looking at this set, is Ignoble Hierarch. Maybe most obviously because it is just a color-shifted version of a staple of our format, and not a staple of the format that's inherently broken, just like an amazing card, right? Ignoble Hierarch has been a fantastic staple for CEDH for a really long time. Ignoble Hierarch is no different. It's cleaned up some Thrasios File Smasher decks. Just a good card.
Yep, nothing new to add there. It's it's performing exactly like everyone thought it was going to. It's Jund Hierarch. It goes really well in anything that has at least Jund colors. Another one is Dalthy Voidwalker. So this one I think was really, really interesting, but also at the same time, I think it definitely lived up to all the hype that it had.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were really high on this card, and as we're seeing it actually in the wild, there's a good reason why people were high on the card.
Yeah.
It's a very, very good performer. It does with nuking graveyards and what it does with being able to steal stuff. It is putting people off of plans. Like, I'm not going to cast a possible spell into it if I know that spell could then be cast for free. So it's almost like a pseudo stacks piece in that aspect alone. The fact that it can connect with shadow and stuff like that. It's doing everything that we thought it would do. So it's doing a very good job.
I've definitely resolved that card and received many expletives from my opponents in response.
No, my breach lines. Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, and our last card we want to put on the even level is Profane Tutor. Now, the thing with Profane Tutor is it is pretty much unplayed in the majority of places in the format. However, in the places that it is played, it is inherently busted. And that's kind of the level of that card, right? We expected it to do some really broken, degenerate things, and then if you're trying to play that in a fair way, it's not CEDH competitive.
Yeah, everyone was super low on this card, and that's exactly where it should have been. It's not a playable card in our part of the format. It's absolutely busted in where everyone said it was going to be busted, in the things with Cascade or Pseudo Cascade, looking at you, Cody. And but other than that, it's absolutely unplayable. So it does great in the decks that it's in, all two of them.
Yeah, exactly. Cody and Yidris, it's great.
Yeah, Cody and Yidris, you're welcome for the new piece of tech.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's exactly where it should be, in my opinion.
Right.
All right. So we didn't want to have a million of those on there because, people are really bad about estimating cards. So we're going to get into the longer list now.
Yeah. And this is where we start incurring the wrath of the viewers, I assume.
That's fine. Bring it on. Watch the subscriber count fall. I live and thrive on your tears. I'm just kidding. Please don't unsubscribe. We love you. Okay, so we're going to start right off with a really hot one, and that is Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. That is everybody's favorite or least favorite monkey. He's the legendary 2-1-for-1 that does 1.5 billion things. I can't believe they put this many things on this card. It's absolutely ridiculous. So, this. I think we're going to start off real strong here because I think we're going to diverge almost immediately.
Yes.
So I think this is really good. So the reason that this one is on here is mostly because of me. So everyone thought this card was the most absolute busted, craziest card that has ever come out of existence, and every format has completely turned upside down because of it. I would say that on the whole, that is true for Legacy, Vintage, 1v1 formats, Modern, things like that. Yeah. I think Ragavan is absolutely great. We're getting to the point in those formats where the Delver decks are, running Delver is one of the worst cards in the deck.
Yeah.
It's like, there's just so many great cards nowadays that replace Delver that he's slowly getting eked out, and he's been a staple in that deck for like 11 years. But anyway.
Yeah, which is wild to say.
it's something, formats, and decks and stuff like that, they come and go, they get new pieces of tech, and we're just seeing so many pushed cards now that those are no longer as good. It's a really cool thing, and there's a whole other discussion around that kind of thing. But so here's the thing about Ragavan. I am actually, so I was not as high on this card. And I think that there are people out there that are definitely saying that it's super high and that it's exactly where it should be. But I have seen this card perform. I have seen people rip a mana drain off of it and then use it to counter a spell later in the I've seen the Ragavan, circus come to town. I've seen it all. I've seen it all actually happen. What I've seen more often than not is that you drop a Ragavan and it does absolutely nothing. You might be lucky to get it to maybe rip something, but for the most part, people are actually trading cards to just not get hit off of Ragavan. Yeah. Because sometimes if you get a really high card, like a really valuable card, some people will just choose to leave that in exile. Yeah. Like they won't even cast it. Let's say you rip a Dockside or something. There are people that will actually just leave Dockside in exile just so you can't have it. Which is crazy. Now, all that might be suggesting, oh my gosh, that's why this card is so good. How often do we create our biases based upon the ceiling versus the floor. Everyone remembers the time that they ripped a vampiric tutor off of the Ragavan hit,
Right.
cast it, and then the game was over because that's great. But how many times did you rip a land? How many times did you cast a Ragavan into a bunch of things with 3 toughness, and it could just not connect?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of these different things where, a lot of people are thinking, oh, at worst it's a mana dork. And I don't think that's necessarily true either. So I think a lot of people were high on this card, and I'm actually going to put it as a little bit lower. I'm not going to say it's a bad card, but I think everyone that's running red is just automatically putting it in their deck. I'm seeing it in Duretti and stuff like that, and I just don't think it belongs in every deck. So what do you think?
So it's such an interesting card to analyze because first of all, I don't think anything you said is even slightly wrong by any definition, right? I'm a very mulligan focused player. Just in general, I feel like that's the biggest improvement to my game was when I really started focusing on mulligans in the game. And Ragavan is definitely one of those cards that makes me snap keep hands. And I'm not saying only a Ragavan, but if I have a Ragavan and free counter magic in a hand, the rest of the hand can be pretty medium, and I'm really happy to keep that hand. However, what you're saying about Ragavan in the mid to late game is 100% true. The worst case scenario, it's a mana dork argument is that argument gives me anxiety because there's a reason I don't play it in Dawnmaker Thrasios, even though that's because that's a grindy mid-range deck and I'm playing every mana dork available to me in that deck. I do not play Ragavan because one, it's not a deck designed to do well ripping cards off other people's decks, right? I feel like leaner Adnaz decks tend to do well when you're ripping card advantage away from other people. But in that type of deck, I want that mid-range grind value, right? However, the greedier decks, not having to play things like Memnite to sacrifice to your Calling the Weak, Ragavan's going to be better than that any day of the week, right? So it definitely has its place in the format. One specific, I guess, hot take I have is people dash Ragavan way too often. It's literally one of my biggest pet peeves, and I think it's because people are I need the value right now, and it's the whole good part about Ragavan is you go play it turn 1, and then it's free generating value every turn. Every time you pay 2 mana for Ragavan, I do not think it's worth it because you're refunding a mana and then maybe ripping a good card, but you've upfronted 2 mana to pay for this card.
Yup.
I think the dash is one of the most overhyped parts of that card and probably one of the most useless parts of that card.
They just put so many unbelievable abilities on there, and to add dash to it for that, I think people like the gotcha, if you will.
Yes, it's for the top deck tutors, exactly.
You got it. It's I vamp tutored, or I did a tutor, put it on top, I MCL'd past the turn, and then you got it.
Yeah,
sure, that's fun.
It reminds me of the meme back when the Yu-Gi-Oh anime was first coming out. It was you reveal my trap card, and that's how I feel people feel Ragavan is.
Ragavan. Oh, it's so true. Yeah.
But in general, I think the card can do a lot in the early game, but you're 100% correct. As soon as you hit turn 3, turn 4, it's what are you doing?
And that's what I have said from the very beginning with Ragavan. Amazing turn 1, really good turn 2, turn 3 and on, not great. I think I'd rather have a lot of other cards than a turn 3 Ragavan.
And as I said, if your deck is full of cards with low card quality, right, like Turbo Adnaz or very aggressive, proactive decks in the format, play Ragavan. Definitely. It gets you your cards back, right? That's the kind of stuff you need. You need cards that are cheap and generate you a lot of card advantage and can generate you mana, right? Which is already along with the Turbo plan's trying to do. Great in those decks. However, if you're trying to grind, if you're trying to go for a card advantage play, and you're expecting games to go longer, maybe double check that you really need a Ragavan.
Yeah, I think one of the most misplaced things is what I mentioned. Things like Duretti. Duretti is not this combo deck. It's not this turbo deck. It's looking to do a bunch of shenanigans with the graveyard. It's looking to create these layered combos. You're not doing anything with Ragavan. You're just, that's what I mean. I think a lot of people overhype the card, and they're just throwing in everything that has a red color identity, and I don't think that's correct.
Agreed, completely.
Yeah.
All right, our next card is one that I'm super excited to talk about because this was a very hyped card, and I still think it was underhyped. We're going to talk about Esper Sentinel. Esper Sentinel, the first game I ever saw it played in, 2 players resolved one, and it dominated that game. It is such a low-cost card, and I feel like that was the part that people missed about it. So when it came out, people were comparing it to Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. And first of all, if you're comparing a white card to 2 of the most powerful draw engines of all time in a multiplayer format, you might want to double check how hype you are about this card. Like, it's insane. Little known benefit of the card, it adds to Mox Opal. Like, people obviously know that, right? But like, that comes up way more than I thought it would. And just, this is another one that you resolve this early. For anyone that's resolved the turn 1 Rhystic Study, you know how good that is. Like, that is some of the best stuff you can be doing in our format, turn 1 Rhystic Study. Esper Sentinel says, yeah, you can use your fast mana on other stuff. You can play me for 1 mana, and I will draw you cards. And you may be in a meta where somehow in this current age of CEDH, people are not playing into Esper Sentinel. And if that's you, congratulations, you're probably in this weird twilight zone, and I love that. However, absolutely. In the super aggressive turbo meta that we currently live in, Esper Sentinel is a fed lad. I have seen so many cards go to that card, and for 1 mana, and unlike Mystic Remora, you invest once and you're done. You spend a single white mana and it's easily been a double ancestral recall for me so many times in the game. Also, a big thing that came up was the Ranger Captain lines. Grabbing a Ranger Captain of Eos, playing an Esper Sentinel. It's a lot of white mana, right? But then suddenly you have a silence on the board and a quasi Mystic Remora effect, and that synergy is just insane too.
I agree. And just, everything you said about Esper Sentinel was correct. And I also agree when you say that I think that there wasn't enough hype given to this card. Number one, it is in white, because like you said, the 2 most powerful draw engines ever, and you're trying to compare it. Those are in blue. This one's in white, And to give such a powerful card, I think people were down on it because it said when it was their first non-creature. So it wasn't like Mystic Remora, it was every non-creature. It wasn't like Rhystic Study where it was any spell. It was first non-creature. They were like, well, that's not that great. We live in a multiplayer format where people play a lot of spells.
Yeah.
I felt this got a lot of the Crom treatment early on. A lot of people were real down on Crom early on in its life. They never played it. Why would you ever put something for 5 in the command zone? That's such a horrible thing, know, and how wrong people ended up being. They were just low on it. And this was the exact same thing. Well, it's only 1, and it's an only non-creature. No, this card does absolutely bonkers things. If somebody gets into a counterspell war, you're drawing 3 cards that turn. Because 3 players are doing things. It's absolutely insane how good this card is.
That's one of the biggest things that I think people missed is, and you beautifully compared it to Crom there, because it's a perfect comparison. The times in which you are having a counterspell war on an opponent's turn, you're not the one casting these spells. So say, player A is trying to go off, they cast a non-creature. They're not paying for it because they're trying to win the game. You draw a card from them. Then player B responds to them, and they're like, hey, I need you to have interaction right now to back me up. I'm going to cast a spell. I'm not going to pay for it. Now you're drawing from them. Maybe it keeps even going longer. The third player goes, and you're suddenly, you can draw 3 cards a return. You can be an Ancestral Recall on 1 turn. This card's insane.
And that's each turn. Four player format every turn. It resets, and it's a 1-drop. It's a 1-drop. It's like it's you play. I Esper sitting on turn 1. I know it's a hot take. I would choose it over Ragavan on turn 1.
100%. 100% same boat here.
Yeah, it's such an amazing card, and I agree. People were high on this card. They should have been higher, in my opinion. Yeah. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is an interesting one because I think people were abnormally high on this one, and that is Garth One Eye. And this is the whole reason we made this episode. I'm sorry. It's for this card. I lied to Ian. I didn't tell him the reason this is all just a masquerade to talk about Garth One Eye. So
this is new information to me, people at home.
Yeah,
This is
just revealing. I'm just revealing it. I'm pulling back the curtain. This is actually a hidden Garth One Eye episode. Okay. So I think people were high on this card because of what it did, the things that it represented. Holy smokes, I can cast a Black Lotus. Holy smokes, he can combo with Food Chain and I can kill you with Shivan Dragons. Or I can Brain Geyser you. Or I could do whatever. It's 5 colors, blah, 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 and on and on and on and on and on. So this card stinks. This card it's not good. I know all 2 of you that are still playing Garth are screaming at me right now, but that's okay. Because I think there was just the fact that the word Black Lotus was on it, I think gave it an artificial amount of hype. And yes, there is technically a deck out there that could be somehow construed as a competitive deck. I've seen it actually played in our tournament. Garth One Eye was played in it. It didn't make it to the top 16, so but and that's not necessarily to say that's the reason that it's bad.
Yeah.
But it was in 5 colors. It was a legendary creature, but all of those key things that we want to see in the command zone. When it comes to competitive, you usually want it to be your combo enabler, or you want it to be your card advantage engine, or something to that effect. There are certain exclusions to that, or exceptions to the rule. Things like Silas Wren in Roger Silas. He's really there for the colors. Teamer Malcolm, Tana's there mostly for the colors, not only. But Garth was fell victim to that. And everyone kind of saw Garth coming from a mile away. Because when you were casting Garth, you weren't winning the game. You had all this extra setup necessary. If you're doing Food Chain, you still needed to enable a haste enabler to do his effect. And so you needed, two pieces on the battlefield, something in the exile zone. And I could talk about it all day long. But the card, I think, got more hype than it really, really deserved. And it's showing now because you're seeing it absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, I was very openly low on Garth when it was printed, but I agree, there was a lot of people really hyped about it, and I think it was this appeal of wow, I can cast a Black Lotus, that's worth like 10 grand.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Now, that's banned in this format, and it's I don't know, man, it's if there were any less restrictions on it, it could do stuff. If it could just always tap to make a Black Lotus, then you could do some crazy stuff with Jeskai Ascendancy. But people were going hard, talking about playing Concordant Crossroads and Ephemerate to flicker your Garth and make Black. What?
Yeah, exactly. They really wanted to make this work. I think they really wanted to cast Black Lotus or Shivan Dragon. They were trying so hard, and just as hard as they tried, it just never worked out. So
and if that's people's ish, that's awesome, right? If you wanna, you're making something probably under the vein of high power, and you're but this commander is really cool and I want to brew around that space, I think that's totally fine. I think we're more addressing the people who are nah, this is real.
This is viable. Submission to the deck list database incoming. It's it was a little bit more. I think, like I said, they wanted it to work. Yeah. And that's really what it was. All right, well, that wraps it up for this episode of the podcast, because this is only a Garth podcast. So,
oh, man, we got to delete all these show notes.
Thank you so much for listening and watch. I'm just kidding. now that the Garth thing is out of the way.
Now that the weight's completely off your shoulders.
Exactly. Now I can rest easy. Now the show can really begin. So.
So this next duo I'm going to talk about, and yes, it's a duo because these two cards sort of fill in the same space for me as far as like same set, same idea in their play, and that's Damn and Out of Time. So when I saw these cards printed, I said, thank goodness, as someone who enjoys playing many different ways of CEDH, I like brewing in the turbo space as well as I like brewing in spaces that are meant to completely stop the turbo space, that's who I am. I'm a brewer. And I saw Damn and Out of Time and I was like, oh my god, these are such efficient board wipes. And if you're playing proactive decks like Turbo Ad Nauseam, you really don't care about your creatures a lot. However, decks like, I don't know, say Kenrith Stacks, boy, do they care about your board state. Maybe Winota, I don't know. I've heard some pretty cool people are playing that card lately. That's a deck where you really need to wipe that board. Mm-hmm. And so when Damn and Out of Time are printed, I was like, heck yeah, let's jump on these cards, let's play them. And I think these have been super underhyped. And the reason for this, and I think this is really interesting why it's a talking point in today's conversation, is I think people are starting to... So I play in a lot of tournaments, play in a lot of open metas, stuff like that. And it feels like people are kind of giving up a bit on doing counter Nas stuff. And it might be that I just came back from Denmark and that meta is just so turbo that you're just like living, breathing, sniffing turbo all day, every day. Yeah. And so, I'm a lot used to like the Trice meta where you kind of play in and there's like a bunch of, lower tier stacks decks that like kind of take you off guard. And if you're playing a turbo deck, you can often get tripped up if they have like an early stacks piece. And so seeing Damn and Out of Time, I was like perfect for these sort of mid-range turbo or like turbo decks that can also afford. I mean, like a piece like Damn, it's 2 mana if you hit it off an Ad Nauseam, right? But it also can just save you sometimes. So not seeing these cards played as much definitely, to me, gave me a reflection of like, really, this is what the format looks like right now. A place in which, if you're playing an aggressive deck, you don't even feel like you need to play something like Damn or Out of Time. And a big part of this, I also think, is white is not as favored in the current moment. So if you're thinking about like Esper Ad Nauseam decks, Esper sort of turbo decks, they're just not favored because they're not playing red. Like I was listening to your you jumping on to the Mind Sculptors a little while ago and talking about how if you're not playing red, you're not like basically doing it right now.
Yeah, I said some things during that podcast. Some things were said. Yeah, sure, that was one of them. That was one of the things that was said also. Yeah, that happened.
And I think, to be honest, I think a lot of people reflect that and they feel that. So I think, white heavy Ad Nauseam decks are not being played as much. Now, obviously, Blue Farm is considered one of the best decks in the format right now, and it can play these options. But I am not seeing them a lot. So I think it's just a really interesting reflection on what people feel they need to be doing in their decks at the current moment.
What I think is so interesting about these 2 cards specifically is kind of what you said. There's not that often that a card or cards come out that actually tell you about what a format is or is not. And a lot of people really don't disseminate that information like you just did. Really what they say is, oh, that card's not good, or that card is good, and there's not that reflection in there of, this is actually helping define what is or is not a format. When you see a card like this that's like, wow, this card is really good, and this card should be hyped, and nobody's playing it, you have to suddenly ask the question, why? You start to question yourself. You start to doubt yourself. You're like, wait a minute, am I the one taking crazy pills here kind of statement, because you're like, what am I reading wrong here? This card is fantastic. I really enjoyed Out of Time a lot. I really thought it was a great card, because it doesn't destroy them like Damn does. Recursion's big, but like using Out of Time and phasing them out, like stripping people of their card advantage engines from things like Crom or Timna or like you said, Kenrith, phasing them out, they can't get those back. they're not in exile. They're not in the command zone. They don't get to choose to put that in the command zone as a replacement effect because it doesn't change zones. That's actually really powerful. Like, it's super powerful. Like, in some aspects, some would consider it like Council's Judgment good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I see this, as, up there with Council's Judgment, because you can destroy non-9 permanents with Council's Judgment, blah, blah, blah. But, like, you can wipe out all creatures. Like, if there's 4 creatures on the battlefield, they're just not coming back in a game of CDH. You're not going to go 4 more turns a lot of times.
Which is insane, because that's a creature per player. That's not even that, like, unrealistic.
Exactly. You take out 2 dorks, somebody's early Crom, and then, like, a Dark Confidant or a Dalthy Voidwalker, or somebody's Ragavan. Ha-ha. Here goes your overhyped card.
Get their Garth while they're at it.
Or get their Garth one eye as they're waiting for it to come back around because they couldn't put the Concordant Crossroads on the battlefield. See, this is why Garth doesn't work, Garth players. This is why it doesn't work, because you get out of timed and then your whole plan is destroyed. Oh gosh. But I agree. Like, some people are saying it's like I'm kind of giving up. Like, I have seen. So back when I started playing, I noticed a trend where I was just like, why are all these creatures just staying around? This was back in my early CEDH days.
Yeah.
I'm like, how in the world did that Dark Confidant, a 2/1 for 2, draw you that many cards? And I was like, because no one's playing a board wipe in this side of the format. And then we started to see things like Toxic Deluge and things like that come into play. And then, your Cyclonic Rifts were still being played and stuff like that. But then we've gotten, like you said, so turbo and all this. You're like, I can't pack a board wipe.
Yeah.
That's too much of a loss for me. And that's kind of interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting that people are like, I can't pack board wipes. I just can't do it.
And a card we're going to talk about later, I think, ties in really well into this conversation on what, as a turbo deck, you can afford as a board wipe. And we'll get to that.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think these were very underhyped. And I think people still are sleeping on them, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so let's talk about our next one, and that one is Endurance. This unbelievably overpushed card, which was... why does Green get all the best stuff? Like, I get it, because it sells Commander product. I get it, Like, so this card... everyone saw it, and it did a whole lot of stuff for what we thought was going to do in the format. So everyone was really, really high on this card. They were like, hey guys, it stops Thassa's Oracle. I'll just bury the graveyard into the bottom of their library. Their devotion isn't right, and then they don't win the game. Got them. Yeah. And then other people are like, hey, I can disrupt their breach stuff. They're doing this, and I'll bury all their cards, and they can't escape anymore, and now they're out, and stuff like that. And all that stuff is true, but it kind of it's, in my opinion, and that's why it's on the list today, is it's not as good as I think people were making it out to be. Yeah. So that's just my opinion. Like, the whole breach thing, okay, you got to time it like just right in order for disrupt breach, because otherwise it's just not working. Number one, like, you have to maybe do it with breach on the stack. Maybe that's the best you got. Because if you do it any time after that, with like some weird narrow circumstance, maybe then you've got it. But other than that, if they brain freeze themselves, they're just filling their graveyard again. Yeah, you can't do it with LED unless it's on cast. And it's
not like you can let the brain freeze resolve either, because then they have a ton of counter magic that they're just sitting there in the graveyard with, right?
Exactly. So the timing, you basically have a super narrow window to really actually make Endurance do something. Thassa's Oracle, you're right. It will disrupt Thassa's Oracle. It can do that. It is a creature, which is actually really nice in the aspect of most stack interaction. We've gotten so greedy now. It's dispels and miscasts and stuff like that. So that has helped it. I think people just end up holding it in their hand a lot, and then it just ends up getting wheeled away. And then they're like, well, that didn't really do much for me. So I'm not saying it's a bad card, because it is a very good card. This card was clearly pushed, and it does do a lot of work. I just don't think it's the answer all of our problems card that I think everyone was making it out to be for our format, for our part of the format.
See, that's super interesting to me because I don't think I like heard a lot of that talk around it, and I thought it was a little underhyped when I heard about it, and not necessarily because I think, as you mentioned, like you don't play this in a 4-color deck, you don't play this in a 3-color deck, you don't play it in a 5-color deck.
Nope.
But so one of my best friends in the entire world has been playing Yisan for an inappropriate amount of time.
I love that you use the word inappropriate and Yisan in the same sentence because those just go together so well. So it's perfect.
And it's like, it's one of those things where back in the Flash meta, he was playing Loaming Shaman, which is basically endurance without the good parts of endurance, where you can cast it for free just to like punk people trying to resolve Flash. And to get people on Thoracle wins. And so for low color decks like that, Endurance is a really cool card, and it's a really nice thing that they printed something that is good for low color decks and not good for multiple color decks. And I'm so glad. It's like one of the reasons I was so hyped when Jeweled Lotus was printed, although that's definitely had some give and take to it. I'm so happy when low color decks get stuff that like can't always be abused by the high color decks. Now Jeweled Lotus has had things like Cody come out that have made it a little more like, all right, then obviously it's great with Crom and et cetera, et cetera. But that conversation aside, something like Endurance I really feel like is good for low color decks, allows them to just have just like the tiniest bit more game, and then doesn't really do anything if you're going 3, 4, 5 colors. So yeah, I definitely agree. Anyone estimating it as like, this is the savior of the anti-Thassa's Oracle stuff, get out of here with that nonsense. Yeah. But if you're like, hey, Yisan is slightly more playable now, then that's great.
You're right. A lot of what I've seen actual tech of this card being, because a lot of the statements that people said weren't incorrect. They were right. Yeah. It does stop Thassa's Oracle. It does stop this. It does stop that.
Yeah.
But you just didn't actually see it get run anywhere, except for, like you said, things like the mono green decks. They just absolutely loved this piece of tech. It was exactly what they needed to stop things like Thoracle or Breach. They now had the tool to help counteract that stuff.
Exactly.
I agree with you there.
Cool. All right, moving on. It was so funny. This is another dual pair of cards. I didn't realize I kept doing the 2-card thing. But this next double pair is one that I just kind of immediately was like, whatever. And it's another thing I'm happy these types of cards exist. So it's Harmonic Prodigy and Tavern Scoundrel. And these both are pieces for the Quark Sakashima deck. Tavern Scoundrel is also a little more open-ended to anyone doing anything with coin stuff. So like Usury, which came out in this set, and then Okaun and Zindra Split. Those also are seeing Tavern Scoundrel play. So I've always respected Quark Sakashima as a deck. It's one of those decks that if you underestimate it a little bit, it starts doing broken stuff with counterspells where you're like, oh, you get like 6 counterspells for this? That's disgusting. And that just didn't happen a lot because the engine would get disrupted. Now you have even more redundancy with these 2 cards, and they're cheap redundant pieces. You basically have a 2-mana version of your Sakashima or a 2-mana version of your doubling up Quark with Harmonic Prodigy, and that makes these decks just a little more interesting. And Quark Sakashima has kind of come in and become this new, like, hey, this is the fun, cool, unique deck of CEDH. But not only that now, so you already have this like super interesting, unique angle with this deck. It also gets these brand new pieces from this set. 2 of them in the same set, which is so wild to me, that also make you go, oh, wait a minute. Like, you can't let spells resolve while these 2 are out. Like, you actually have to stop this deck immediately. If you were anyone watching the live gameplay from Tier 1 Con saw what happens when you let a Tavern Scoundrel exist on the table with a Quark and a Sakashima. The answer is you lose.
You lose. That's exactly
lose
what
that
happens.
game.
Yep.
And it just generates mana so fast. Like, you can, if you start resolving something like a taxing probe, like, oh no, it went back to my hand. Oh, I won the first time, and now suddenly my free spell is generating 2 mana. Or if you're Harmonic Prodigy, you're like tripling these spells, and it's like, it just gets out of hand so fast, and so much faster than it was before. So the deck was already like, okay, you got to get some momentum going, and then it starts actually feeling kind of degenerate and feeling like really good CEDH stuff. And now it just does that more. And it's a really cool thing for the format, because these were 2 cards I literally were like, oh yeah, hey, look at this thing. Harmonic Prodigy especially. Tavern Scoundrel, I was like, okay, I read coin flip, I get good in coin flip deck. Harmonic Prodigy, I was like, wizards and stuff, whatever. Like, this is some sort of weird modern plant. Get out of here.
Yeah.
And it's turned out to be a real thing.
And see, that was the one I think that really caught me off guard, was because you're right, the Tavern Scoundrel, Kirk Sakashima, I thought about that immediately. And what happens when sets come out is people immediately start brewing things. Yeah. They start to come up with these combos and stuff like that. So the one with Tavern Scoundrel, it was super easy to see things with Kirk and Sakashima. But with Harmonic Prodigy, people were like, oh, wait, we could do some stuff with this thing.
Yeah.
Did you know that it doubles, because it's whatever, if an ability of a shaman or another wizard. So that's triggered or activated.
Yeah.
So Thassa's Oracle, that's a wizard.
Huh. Yeah.
So people were like, hey, that's 2 Thassa's Oracle triggers. And we're like, dude, if you're casting and resolving a Thassa's Oracle, you're winning the game. Winning the game. So, I mean, you don't, that's neat, but you're not really, that's a win. Even, what are you going to win twice? I mean, they're not going to do anything. But Spellseeker was something.
Yeah.
Like, there's something there with Spellseeker, and people were starting to plot out lines.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool. And then we never really saw anything from it. Like, the quintessential wizard deck in Nala, Archmage Ritualist, doesn't run Harmonic Prodigy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just like, I don't need it. I don't need it for what I want to do. I don't want to have to resolve this and that to do this. I can just do things with Spellseeker on its own.
Right.
So I think, honestly, people were a little high on Harmonic Prodigy. I'm not saying they were super high. They didn't think it was like a format breaker or anything. But I think they were a little bit higher than what it ended up being.
Yeah.
I think people were, correct on Tavern Scoundrel. I think some people were brewing with that, like a Freet, where you pay 0 and flip a coin. You just do it infinite times or whatever. Yes. I created infinite mana and win the game. Sure, that's cute.
Fun fact, it's actually a Protean Hulk pile.
Exactly. Yeah. So people were doing all that kind of stuff, and that's fun. But a lot of times it just never comes to fruition beyond the Twitter thread or the Reddit thread that you might see out there where they brew those things. Yep. And then they just kind of dissipate into nothing. So I think people were a little higher on Harmonic Prodigy than it ended up being. I think people were just about right on Tavern Scoundrel. So yeah. So the next one we are going to talk about is Dragon's Rage Channeler. So the reason that I wanted to talk about this one was because in the circles that I run in, Dragon's Rage Channeler was not as hyped. And people were just kind of medium on it. People were talking, hey, this will be really good in Modern. This will be really good in Legacy. And even the people that were talking about it in Modern and Legacy weren't talking about how good it was. Right. Like, this card was responsible for Mishra's Bauble going up to be a $21 card or something now. Like, at the time of this recording, it's like a ridiculous amount of money. So, yeah. And it's because you want to get Delirium in your graveyard through Dragon's Rage Channeler, or Darcy, as they call it. And I think what a lot of people overlooked with Dragon's Rage Channeler is how well it feeds Underworld Breach. You're casting non-creature spells anyway. This is a 1-drop. Cast your 1-drop. Cast your Mox Opal, cast your Lotus Petal, you're surveilling and you're building up, and you can get to an earlier breach through this. Your counter magic, it goes on forever. And by the way, it can also be a Temna attacker when it becomes a 3/3 with flying. There's all of these different things that it can do that I think people weren't initially thinking about when they first saw the card from a CDH perspective. They're like, yeah, that's a Modern card. I'll just leave that to the Modern players or whatever. Right. But really, it ended up having a lot more usage in CEDH than I think people were originally letting on. I am seeing people running Ragavan over Dragon's Rage Channeler right now, and I think that's a mistake. I think Dragon's Rage Channeler, for what we want to do a lot of times, is probably better than Ragavan. So, like, for example, Duretti. Like,
yeah,
I hate to keep coming
definitely.
back to it, but like Duretti should run Dragon's Rage Channeler over Ragavan, in my opinion.
The graveyard deck, probably.
Yeah, graveyard deck. Which how many decks right now are graveyard decks through Underworld Breach?
So many.
Yeah, it's in the right colors. It's it's a 1-drop. It can be used in turbo, and so people finally started to catch on to that. And so now it is absolutely the powerhouse in CEDH that I think it should have been, but it was not that when it first came out.
Yeah. So that's so interesting because I think we've literally had the polar opposite experience with this card, where I feel like a lot of the people I was talking to were like, this is the next 1-drop of the format. You got to play Darcy in every deck with red. If you don't have Tymna, play it. If you're looking the other way, Dragon Rage Chandler, put it in. And I was like, okay, guys, chill for a sec.
Yeah.
So I have like a very succinct view of Dragon's Rage Chandler, which is if you are playing something with graveyards and you are playing Tymna, you should play this card. Period. End of sentence. Mad Farm, Blue Farm, etc., etc., etc. Right? If you are playing a deck that has red, in which attacking can generate you card advantage, and this isn't, or if you're going so hard in the yard, then this is the card for you. Oh man, there's so many rhymes there.
It's like we're building our own Dr. Seuss novel right now. It's coming.
If you want the card to go hard in the yard, this is this is for you. But I've been seeing a lot of like other places, so like things like green Turbo Nas decks that have red and don't have Tymna in the command zone, like for like things with Yidris, and in a deck like that, I don't think it quite makes the cut. Now, once again, if you're already playing bad creatures, and I'm going to use bad in quotes here, right? Like creatures with card quality less than the expectation of CEDH, and you're in red, then definitely swap one of those creatures with something that can get you a lot more card advantage, like Darcy can. Darcy can really fix your draw a lot of the times. I have a mid-range Tymna Crom deck that I've been playing a lot of, and many times in that deck, it's just casual, like put 2 or 3 cards in my graveyard, generate some cards with Tymna, and even then, in that case, there's only so much you can ask from your 1-drops, and this does a lot for that. However, if you're not quite getting like just that little bit more advantage, so something like Tymna, something that can generate you more card advantage, or once again, if you're not going hard in the yard, then I think it's definitely a nuanced card. But it for a 1-drop packs a heck of a punch. I don't know if I can agree with your Ragavan take there. That one might be too hot for me.
I'm all about the hot takes. That stupid monkey. That stupid overhyped monkey. I swear. So.
Cool. So our next card, we're going to talk about Suspend. So this is a really interesting card because, Ryan, I feel like you and I agree pretty heavily on this one. The one place I've seen this card be good is in Cody. And the first time I saw that it was in Cody, I immediately asked Sick Robot, why is this in Cody? And he actually had like a lot of good explanations. I'm not going to try and quote him because I don't think I would do it justice. But basically, there's a lot of really cool stuff where you can protect your own Cody. You can do some stuff with removal for their creatures, yada, yada, yada. On the other hand, I heard people comparing this card to Swords to Plowshares. And boy, oh boy, was that some nonsense.
Yeah, that was some incorrect. Yeah.
And there are people who would be talking about playing this when they've never even like looked twice at a Pongify, and it just stuff like that. And I know you have many opinions on this, Ryan, so I'll let you take the podium here on this one.
So they actually started calling the Swords to Timeshares. Like, because it's a funny word. Yeah, it was like, I was like, yeah. First of all, this is not Swords to Plowshares. Swords to Plowshares is the best removal in the entire history of the game. At me.
I'm about that take. I'm all about that take.
Find a better one. Find a better one.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you want to use a 0-drop one or something that has some sort of upkeep or you lose the game?
Payback,
Like, no. Exile any creature for 1 mana, instant speed.
Yep.
Name a better one. It doesn't matter what the creature is. There's no restrictions. We're talking about Swords to Plowshares right now. We're not talking about Suspend. And when people were comparing it to that, I was like, oh my gosh, you have no idea how high that bar is that you think that they should have. Yeah. And it's just not there. It is absolutely not there. I would actually take a Pongify over this any day of the week. You know, if you're not nuking their commander, they're just putting it back in the command zone. You know, and what critical creature are you hitting in our format? That's like, oh, I got him. You know, like, no. And even if it was something, they're like, I don't miss it that much. You didn't really mess up anything for me if I'm going to get it back in 3 turns. So you're not going to shut down a stacks piece because they're going to lock the board. And they're going to get it back normally within the 3 suspend counters. And we could disseminate all this stuff for a long time, but this just isn't that card. You know, really, there's not a whole lot extra to add on top of what you said. It's just not Swords to Plowshares.
And even comparing it to like common bounce spells in our format, right? Like, first of all, saying better than Pongify, like, it doesn't give them a body. It gives them the creature back in 2 turns, though. And then also, on top of that, like, when has Indestructible been a relevant line of text? And yes, I get that, like, you can exile something like a Dockside, but is that something you want coming back in 2 turns? I certainly do not.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
I don't want to give them another one.
Free, and you know, it's ridiculous. Like,
and not to mention the 1 mana blue bounce spells in our format that we have access to that can hit more than just creatures. I have a very hard time believing that you could convince me that Suspend is worth more stock than those options.
Yeah. I would rather bounce a creature, in my opinion, because for one thing, those are actually a lot more versatile than maybe people were trying to give credit to Suspend for, because you can bounce your own stuff and recast it, like, you know, the Dockside example. Like, you can't do that with Suspend. Yes. It's a purely interactive. You can't actually do double duty with it like we can with a lot of our bounce spells nowadays, which is part of the reason that things like Cyclonic Rift is falling out of favor, because you can't bounce your own stuff with it. So
yes. But and I know obviously you can suspend your own Dockside, but it's 2 turns later, and it's not the same thing as bouncing a Dockside by any means.
No one's suspending their own Dockside.
No.
They'd be like, 2 turns, I'm going to get you guys. You know, like, this is, you better watch out. Be like, no, man, that's not happening.
And as I mentioned, the Cody example, I feel like is like the one place where I even deem this a respectable option, and that's just because having a Cody come back with haste, say like your opponent points a Nature's Claim at it and you don't have any actual stack interaction, you can exile your own Cody, bring it back. You can also exile your own Cody if you need the 1 mana spell to activate the Cody. There's a lot of good stuff in that deck specifically. And anyone curious about like the very detailed argument for why that card's played in there, definitely hit up Sick Robot. He'll be happy to tell you about it.
And I think some people forget that it comes back with haste. You know, that's what Suspend does with creatures. So they come back and they have haste. So doing that with Cody is great, but you can also do the thing with Cody because you have to remove it to be able to Thassa's and win. So it's perfect because you suspend it, and then a lot of times it will do its trigger thing. You go get your Profane Tutor, you cast your Ad Nauseam, you win the game.
Right.
You get to do all that kind of stuff. So it's the perfect 1-drop for that. So this kind of, in my eyes, falls into the Profane Tutor category.
Exactly.
It's really good, or it fits one deck really well, but people are letting it bleed into areas that really just shouldn't belong.
Yeah, no, this is definitely probably the card on this list that I heard the most hype about, that I was the most aghast about.
Yeah. All right, so let's go into our next one. So just for a little context, viewers out there, Ian wanted to put this next card in the in the it's exactly where it should be category, where we mentioned earlier, and I'll let him talk about that when it's his turn. But it's not his turn yet. So we're going to be talking about Void Mirror. So Void Mirror is that card that everyone saw as a really cool Silver Bullet stacks piece. Oh, man, we're talking Chalice of the Void Part 2, you know, and it there were people that were a lot higher on this card, and I was guilty of that. I was also one of those people. I was thinking about it in certain aspects in certain decks, and I got too much tunnel vision on it. Void Mirror is not good. It's not. And we're seeing that play out right now, where people they're trying it out in stacks builds and stuff like that, and it's just sitting there doing nothing. And they're wishing they had something else on the board the entire time. And where they'd really, literally just rather have something like Chalice at that point, and so because of that, people were a little bit higher on it. I was admittedly one of those people, and now that we're knee deep into Modern Horizons 2 CDH meta, it's not being played, and for good reason. It's just not performing. So let us have it, Ian. So you get your moment in the sun. All right, okay, just do it.
I don't think I would feel as strongly about this card had I not been tagged so many times by people, specifically a lot of Winota conversation around this card. And boy, did I look at this and immediately go, why would you ever want to play this? Now, this is one of the most overhyped as well for me, because people were comparing this to Lavinia. And that conversation was probably one of the most frustrating circles I was walking in for like 3 days. In my opinion, Lavinia is actually a really underplayed creature. Like, period, end of statement. Not in the command zone. I'm sorry, Callahan.
Here in comes the wrath of Cal. Oh, I can just feel him furiously typing.
Cal loves me. It's fine. We'll be okay.
Yeah. It's good because Lavinia does suck, Callahan. I'm just kidding. Callahan.
And that's our show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's our show, everyone.
But like, Lavinia in the 99 is like such a brutal one-sided stacks piece. And this card is like kinda half of Lavinia, but also missing one of the best parts of Lavinia, which is the can't cast spells more than the lands thing. And it also just, it like doesn't do it quite right. And on top of that, it's symmetrical.
Yep.
It's symmetrical.
You don't break parity on it. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't break parity on it. And I'm one of the biggest progenitors for stop playing stacks pieces you can't break parity on. And I know Charles will have a lot to say to me about this conversation, because Charles is a huge fan of symmetrical stacks.
Yep. And for good reason. He plays it really well. He knows how to play it. Yeah.
But my entire stacks career is based on the idea that you play every stacks piece that will not affect you, and you break the legs of your opponents while trying to also go for a win. And Void Mirror is a card that I read that says, oh, you want to go for your own game plan? Maybe not. Good job, you stopped your opponent. You also played yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
It stops your own zero mana stuff, which, whatever, it happens. It causes you to tap awkwardly during the game. It can shut down a lot of free spells. And one of the biggest downsides of cards like Lavinia is that you shut down your free counter magic for the whole table. And sometimes your opponents can have a force of will to stop your other opponent that you will stop happening.
Yeah, exactly.
And unlike Lavinia, you don't have the argument of, well, I break parity on this piece so well. You don't. It's symmetrical. It's so bad.
So I think a lot of times also people evaluate this based upon what they consider to be a path in their head. So they're like, what are you talking about? I can cast a turn 1 mana crypt and then get this out turn 1 and completely hose people. And I'm like, that's great. Your mana crypt, don't rely on it casting any other spell this game because of that. Like, don't rely on it to cast your Soul Ring, because your Soul Ring's now dead against it. Because it has to be colored mana. And I think they didn't think past the turn that they landed Void Mirror.
Yeah.
And they're like, this card is so good, I could do this. Be like, yeah, but that mana crypt is so much less useful now. You can only pay generic mana cost. You can't play colorless spells. And they're starting, and they unintentionally nerf themselves in their deck building too. Well, I can't play anything free because my Void Mirror's in there, and that's a nombo. So what are you doing? You're just making everything worse to play this worse card.
And not only that, I don't think the stacks effects on it even that good. Like, that might be my hottest take of the whole thing, and I don't think that's hot of a take, which is that it doesn't really stop that much. Like, if your opponent goes, tap my mana vault, which, by the way, I played last turn by tapping my City of Brass for a colored mana, and then I'm going to tap my mana vault and these 2 lands for this ad nauseum. Nice Void Mirror, dude.
Like, but you don't have any fast mana now.
Yeah.
Angry YouTube commenter says, it's like,
it'd be a shame if, I don't know, there were spirit guides, if there were rituals that cost a single thing of mana, like,
I mean, and not to mention somebody could just Tainted Pact on Instep, which costs a black, and then Thassa's Oracle on their turn, which costs blue.
Yeah.
That didn't stop anything.
Stops nothing with the Thoracle line.
It stopped nothing. So if you're talking about these silver bullets, this ain't it. This is not your silver bullet that you think it is. Yes, I can't cast my Mox Opal. I also can't cast, like you said, the free interaction that would have stopped the other player from winning the game.
Yeah. It's just every single aspect where it could do something good, they just nerfed it a little bit. And like in Modern right now, shut down Living End, got him. But
because Living End is the boogeyman of Modern.
It's actually it's kind of good, right? I think I'm pretty sure it is.
I don't play Modern.
Oh, okay.
I apologize. I don't keep up with it as much as maybe I should, but whatever.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. But I mean, so doesn't Chalice also do that on Zero?
Oh, yes. Chalice on Zero is a much better piece, Ryan. Fantastic point you brought up there. Huh.
Wow.
So
crazy.
weird.
Ryan takes hot take somatic. Tune in every Thursday for a new hot take.
And what's that? You can cast it 4-0 as well? Whoa. Oh, man. But yeah, Void Mirror, I mean, just, it leaves a lot to be wishing for in almost every aspect, I think.
It runs the problem of it's disguising itself as a good card by being almost there.
Almost there.
And and like I said, like I fell trapped to it too. I'm not above this. Like I was looking at it and starting to think about the things it was stopping, and I fell trapped to it. And because it's almost there.
It's so close.
But it's just that little bit that pushes it over, and we just demand a lot of our cards nowadays. So.
And that's the other thing, right? Maybe if this was years ago, if we're talking about like 2016, maybe not pre-partners. Let's talk about like 2015 CEDH. I think you could have a conversation about this card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we're in 2021, baby.
where things like Counterspell isn't good enough.
Yeah.
2 blue counter target spell isn't good enough in our format. Yeah, we demand a lot of our cards.
That's insane. Where people talk about mana drain not being good enough, that's counterspell that also makes you mana the next turn, and it's too slow.
Yeah.
So that's that's the expectation we have of our cards, and we need to respect that.
Mm-hmm. So
this next card, we just got off talking about what you should expect from a 2-mana card. This is by far, I think, underhyped and absolutely degenerate. I'm talking about Dress Down. Dress Down is a card that I have seen warp games. It is fantastic. The card's pushed. It didn't need to be a cantrip. It's so good. It's so cheap. It's so efficient. So a lot of the conversations around Dress Down when it came out was like, not only does it do all these things, it stops Thassa's Oracle win. Like, awesome, great. It stops a Dockside win. Awesome, great. I have been in a game with this card in which my Turbo Naz opponent went, okay, on my end step, I'm going to cast this Dress Down. I, on Winota, staring at my board full of Stax creatures, start sweating profusely. I look for the non-creature Stax permanent. I go, oh no, my opponents on the other board with their creatures that had some sort of interaction or value look at their boards and go, oh no. And that individual untaps, says, oh wow, I only had it was actually Gustav playing Denmark tier 1, and goes, yeah, I only had a Ikra and a Kram on board. I have like 10 creatures in this deck in total. And proceeds to absolutely go off with Bolas' Citadel that turn. And we were like, yeah, we went from feeling like I was running away with that game. I was like, I had an untouchable board state, and it was just gone. It was gone in a moment at flash at the end step. So the fact that, like, one, you can flash in a board wipe, it's obviously, so to be clear, I'm aware that this is not an actual board wipe.
Yeah.
But for that turn, it's a board wipe. So you can flash in this board wipe and draw a card, because it needed to cantrip for some reason.
Why not replace it stuff? Yeah.
And then proceed to go, all right, so I don't have Dockside and I don't have Thassa's Oracle anymore. Oh man, I guess I'm going to have to go for this Breached line off this Adnaz. Darn, you're really making me sweat for it.
Yeah. Aw. I mean, it was going to do that anyway, but whatever.
Yeah, or worst case scenario, I'm going to cast my Thassa's Oracle with a grip full of like 30 cards, and I'll bounce my dress down at the last minute. Like, the card's insane. It does so much for 2 mana. And this is when I was referring to Damn and Out of Time and what we expect from an aggressive deck in our board wipes. This is it. Dress Down is insane for the mana cost. Even if you play a good amount of impactful creatures, it's still worth it to play a Dress Down because, one, it's going to save you against any creature combo in the format. Mm-hmm. Boom. 2 mana, sneak in, shut it down. It's going to save you against Thassa's Oracle. Boom, comes in, shut this down. And, no, never mind, that actually doesn't work. There's definitely some cute stuff. I mean, people don't play Labman anymore, but you can definitely get someone with a Dress Down in the Labman, which I still find very funny. It doesn't work with Thassa's Oracle, unfortunately, because you need to let the trigger happen on the stack. But, but yeah, creature combos, get them out of here. Stacks board states, get them out of here. Like, it just does so much for, once again, 2 mana. It has flash. It cantrips. There's nothing that this card doesn't do. And I know people were excited about it, but it is not seeing enough play. Period. End of sentence. It is not seeing enough play.
So what's interesting for me is that people were very, very down on this card. And I think that was incorrect. And there was a couple of reasons I was hearing the argument why they were down on this card. Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. First of all, they were down on this card because they fell into the quintessential trap of, I want interaction that helps me win the game, not prevents me from losing the game. These are your standard Angel's Graces and things like that. Oh, I don't play Angel's Grace. It just prevents me from losing. It doesn't help me win. I'd rather have a Dispel to protect with counter magic against X, Y, and Z. And so enough people start echoing that off the walls,
right?
And then suddenly someone hears it from the next room, and they start to hear that Angel's Grace is just a bad card.
Yep.
They're like, oh, well, Angel's Grace is a bad card. That's not what they were saying.
Right.
They were saying that they would just rather protect in a proactive deck against, with something like a Dispel.
Yeah.
So in a Turbo Naz deck or something like that, they wanted to use something like Dispel. But people started to misconstrue that as Angel's Grace is a bad card. With the amount of Thorkel we have running around, Angel's Grace is not a bad card. If you're in Turbo or something like that, yeah, great. There's probably better cards for you. But if you're not in Turbo, yeah, Angel's Grace is fine. Dress Down suffers the same problem. Dress Down, everyone says, well, it stops Thorkel. It stops this. It stops that. It stops this third thing. It was running that endurance thing, right? And everyone was like, that doesn't help me win the game. That just prevents me from losing it. And I don't want that.
Yeah.
Except what you just said.
Yeah.
Hey, most stacks pieces nowadays aren't Winter Orbs.
Yep.
They're not void mirrors. They're not void mirrors. They're creatures.
Yeah.
So imagine flash in on that person's instep. Suddenly all the stacks has been lifted off the board.
Yeah.
Your Sanctum Prelate no longer holds back your mana. A million different
Archon
things.
of Emeria, all gone. Yep.
Yeah. All of those things. Even the big ones, the Archons of Valor's Reach that somebody cheated out into play. Now I can't cast that thing. And another thing about this is it's an enchantment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an instant or sorcery that you cast that somebody can counter with a miscast or a dispel. It's an enchantment. It's like endurance in that aspect of its creature, and we don't have the spells to help interact with that on the stack. So because people have been stubbing out, they've been swapping out their mana drains and their counter spells, which counter anything, for the things like miscasts and dispels to interact only on the stack.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Dress Down, you can't touch it.
Yep.
You're sitting there just like staring at all your interaction that only covers X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't cover enchantments, and you're screwed. Yeah. And now all of a sudden your Thassa's Oracle on the stack does absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It enters, doesn't win you the game. Now you're screwed.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think that Dress Down was absolutely underhyped. I think they looked at the color blue and they said, well, I could just run counter magic. Why would I run Dress Down? Well, because like you said, Winota and stacks heavy strategies, Najeela.
Yeah.
Najeela gets stopped. Every creature in the command zone gets stopped. And it's like, I could go on for days about Dress Down because I think Dress Down is a fantastic card. It was a perfect silver bullet against Hull Breacher when Hull Breacher was legal.
Yeah.
I'm going to wheel, I'm going to Dress Down.
Yep.
Yep. And now everyone does get to wheel their hand.
Yeah.
And you didn't just kind of close out the game and just strip everyone out.
Right. And I think that's actually a fantastic example. Because sometimes people think, oh, well, I don't play against Winota a lot. I don't play against Kenrith stacks a lot. Those aren't always the creatures you have to worry about. If I'm playing Turbo Naz and my opponent is about to resolve a Dockside for 11, that, for me, I'll spend a Dress Down to counter that any day. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about Opposition Agent, if I'm playing a Turbo strategy where I need to tutor once and then cast by Ad Nauseam, I need to tutor once. And I will happily, at end step, not even when I need to tutor, I will happily throw down a Dress Down to shut off their Opposition Agent and then go for my win. And it's creatures like that. So you don't have to be playing against heavy creature stacks. You just have to be playing against something that needs to be answered, which in this format, there's a lot of things that need to be answered.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing is that, like you said, you have to sacrifice at the beginning of the end step. So you cast on someone else's end step, you get an entire turn where you can just do whatever it is you need to do to help win.
Right. And an entire turn you don't have to pay mana into, which is insane.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of advantages of this card, but it was kept getting trapped under all these stigmas. And quite frankly, no one was just giving it a chance, is really what it was. We kept talking about, like you said, with Dam and Out of Time, where people are just giving up on removing creatures. Yeah. And that's what allows people to be super greedy with the creatures they're doing. The Opposition Agent can be backbreaking to some decks. The Silver Bullet Stacks piece that you have can be backbreaking to some decks. And so people were only thinking about it in defensive ways when it actually does have offensive strategies. Shut down all stacks pieces, I'll win on my next turn.
Right.
Okay, so the next one we're going to be talking about is a really funny enchantment land called Urza's Saga. So everyone lost their minds when they saw this. Partially because it was one of the very early spoiled cards in the set. So it was definitely setting a precedent, and people just had all this time to kind of stew on this card. On a side note, everyone knew that this set was going to be absolutely bonkers. I don't know why anybody would think anything else. They led with fetch lands.
Yeah.
They led. They said there are going to be fetch lands in this set. And you're like, that wasn't even the wildest thing you're leading with. That is insane that you're just leading with this. And so you knew this set was going to be bonkers because one of the things they spoiled shortly after that was Urza's Saga.
Yeah.
Now, everyone was super duper high on Urza's Saga. Man, you could do this and you could create constructs and I can go fetch anything, any 0/1. Wow, that can get my LED. That can get my Mana Crypt. That can get my Soul Ring. That can get my insert X 0 or 1 artifact here. I could go on forever. In practice, I don't want my Mana Crypt on turn 3. In practice,
at best.
Exactly. At best, if you land this on 1 and don't really cast anything else, like maybe what are you going to do? Land Urza Saga and then cast your Soul Ring? Isn't that what you wanted to fetch with your Urza Saga? Like, what kind of scenario are you putting together here where you're having all this colorless sources? oh, well, I can make a construct that I could sacrifice to culling ritual. Be like, you don't want a colorless source that early in the game. Not in the turbo strategy that the story you're trying to unfold to me.
Yeah.
Like, in this side of the format where we are demanding a lot of our turns, we are having very few turns, Urza Saga is unbelievably slow to only get a mana rock.
Yes.
You know?
At the cost of a land.
Yeah. By the way, you sacrifice the land at the end. It feeds Dockside Extortionist because it's an enchantment land, so your opponents get an extra Dockside treasure. And that's not make or break, but that's another point against it.
Yeah.
And
dies
I
to
think
Blood Moon immediately too.
Yeah, exactly. And there was all of these things that people were hyped about what it could do, because I think, once again, this kind of fell into some of the trappings of the other formats. Other formats were like, this is absolutely bananas. This is crazy what this thing can do for us, because they're running 4 of them.
Yep.
You know, if we're only running 1 of them, and if we're lucky to get it on turn 1, even then it's not great. And if we're getting it on turn 3, that's even worse.
Yeah.
So it feels very... It feels like Gemstone Caverns, but worse. Like, because like turn 1, you might have the ability to kind of get somewhere with it. Like drawing Gemstone Caverns turn 3, you're just like, oh, that's the worst thing I could have drawn.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's. I think that this was way overhyped. I don't think that this card's doing much for us.
I 100% agree with you. Bring up that great Modern example. I've been playing like the new Affinity revitalized deck in Modern, and it's 100% Urza Saga, best card in the deck. You're making constructs. I'm swinging in with 11/11s. I'm getting an equipment that gives things trample. It's literally, I resolve this, or not resolve. I play a land and I win the game off of it. Right? That's super fine for 1v1. That's not the format we play. It's not. Yeah. It's just the agency of that card. If you're paying 2 mana into it to make a construct, you are chugging along at a very different type of game than the average CEDH deck.
You made a mistake.
Yeah.
You made a mistake is what you did.
I will say there is one addendum to the Urza Saga conversation, I will say. And I have 2 specific examples, and then probably there are others that exist, which is Magda and Elsha for me. Those decks both have very important combo pieces that are 1 mana artifacts. And in those circumstances, Urza Saga starts to look a lot more attractive. And because that's not just getting you a Jewel Lotus, it's not just getting you a Mana Vault, that's getting you your win con. And if your land grabs you your win con basically for free, kind of for a mana, this is a whole different conversation. However, the conversation I heard around this card, like you were describing, was like, but on turn 3, I can go get my mana crypt. And you're like, so what?
Yeah, you lost a land to do that.
You know what you should mulligan for? Your mana crypt for turn 1.
You know what's better than Urza Saga? The actual thing you wanted to tutor for.
The thing you want to get, dude.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was so hyped up, and I was like, what?
Yeah, I mean, like, in Affinity and stuff like that, it was good. It is good. So much so that people are like, this card's going to get banned. It's going to get banned. And I think, once again, this led to a lot of people overhyping it in our space.
Yep.
We are not 1v1. We are multiplayer singleton. We don't get to run 4 of things. We get to run 1 of something. And drawing that feels like drawing a Gemstone Caverns. You're just you're putting a colorless land onto the battlefield that you don't even get to keep for 3 turns. Yep. Are you really going to create a construct off of it? Yeah. Like, that just seems so bad.
And even in the best case scenario, think about a 1v1 format, right? You're both at 20 life. You have to remove 20 life from the game. That is 2 swings. So say you make an insane number, a 10-10 construct, because you're playing some Affinity style deck. That's 2 swings, you win that game. In our format, that is 1/12 of the available life totals for a 10-10 creature. It just doesn't matter.
That's right. Yeah. And people get super scared of 10-10s, but it's like, dude, you know you're going to have to swing 12 times for that to kill everyone and be unblocked. Yeah. Like, we're talking best case scenarios here.
Yeah.
Like, it's not cutting the mustard in this format, in my opinion.
Anyway.
So, And I'm sure there's that one card out there that some deck has that, they're yelling and screaming right now.
Yeah.
But didn't you know it could do X, Y, and Z? I'm sure it can.
Right.
But once again, I go back to the old adage, we demand a lot of our cards nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. So. And it's so true. So true. Now this next card, I'm super excited because I played this at the pre-release in every one of my decks. And I was like, this is literally one of my, like, just, you ever play a card and you're like, oh, this is one of my new favorite cards of all time.
Yep.
And it feels like a limited card, and it feels like a fun card to play in limited and like casual commander, but it's being played way more than I thought it was. And that card is Step Through. It's 5 mana to bounce 2 things, or more importantly, 2 mana, instant speed, grab a wizard out of your deck. And turns out that is just good enough. When I first saw this card, and a lot of the conversation around it was, Inala, you go grab your Spellseeker. But great, like totally, I get it. 1 card win condition, boom. 2 mana, uncounterable tutor, love it. Go for it, do your thing. There's so much more to this card than just that, which is not a statement I thought I would be saying, talking about Step Through in CEDH. But it grabs a ton of value creatures. The place that got me so excited to hear about this card was in mid-range Najeela lists, because turns out there are 2 very important wizards in that deck. 1, Thassa's Oracle. Turns out, I don't know if you guys have heard about that card, but it's real good.
It's okay. It's all right. Yeah.
And the other one is Derevi. Also really good. So if you're on a Najeela list and you don't feel the pressure to play an Adnaz, if you're on the Deafening Silence variant of that list, you're playing Fire Covenant, you don't really care about your life total as your resource in that deck, Step Through in that version of Najeela is fantastic. I mean, it just grabs literally 2 of your win cons, and that's instant speed, once again, uncounterable tutor for your win cons. That's awesome. That is so awesome. Mm-hmm. So I'm just so excited that this card that I saw and was like, oh man, I wish I could play this more. And I was like, wait, people are doing it.
I'm allowed to now. I don't get ridiculed. I'm allowed to. More than one person said it. Yeah.
And there's also just, I really take the time to, and this is going to be a big search, and I'm sorry about this. Take the time to go through Scryfall with the word wizard in a deck that you want to play. And you're going to find there's a lot more cards that have that subtype. And by the way, they keep printing broken wizards. They keep doing it. Oh my God, they keep doing it.
Yes,
even in the new set coming up, Midnight Hunt, which probably will be out by the time this comes out, they're still printing broken wizards. Like, it's insane. So just do that for yourself, and you're going to be like, oh God, oh, that's a wizard? Oh my God, that's a wizard. It's wild.
And just, you'd be surprised about how many things that are wizards in our format. Like, it's actually, like you said, I think a lot of people forget that Thassa's Oracle's a wizard.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, oh yeah, it's a merfolk. Yeah, like, no, actually, it's a merfolk wizard. Yeah. I think a really highly underrated part, too, is the fact that it's cycling.
Yeah.
Pay 2, go grab your Spellseeker. Pay 2, go grab your Derevi. Pay 2, go grab your Thassa's Oracle. These are win cons. You know, these aren't just like, I'm going to go grab some value piece and get some advantage. It's an activated ability, like you said, which you can't interact with on the stack. There's almost nothing that does it, because Stifle isn't good enough for CEDH. They all clamor, counters the wizard cycling. Just saying, Stifle the new hot card. But also at the same time, you in a pinch, maybe you can cast Step Through. You're in a real bad spot if you're casting it. That is a
big pinch. Yeah.
Yeah, you're in a real bad spot if you're casting it.
Yeah.
But the reason that I say that is because Wizard Cycling, this is not the first time it's been printed.
Yeah.
It was printed once before. It was printed way back in that crazy Future Sight set where they had all the new borders and stuff like that. And it was called Vidalcan Aether Mage or Aether Mage. And that card was just nigh unplayable. Like at least Step Through does a little bit more, you know?
Yeah.
Like I think it returns a sliver or something ridiculous.
Yes, correct.
But it has Wizard Cycling too. But when those cards get lost to the pages of history, if you will, because we get so many new cards all the time and so many new players enter in after certain cards are printed, you just forget that they exist.
Yeah.
So sometimes it takes something like Step Through to be printed for people to realize, hey, this is actually a super good ability in a lot of decks.
Yeah. And the fact that it costs 2 to cycle as opposed to 3 with Aether Mage is
that's true. And it was recycling 2 versus 3, which made it even better.
Yes.
And it's, put it into your hand. It's not on top of your library. It's instant speed. It's not a spell cast. Like, there's all kinds. It gets around Void Mirror, which is the new hot card. I'm going to find any way to bring Void Mirror in, just so you know. It gets around things like Chalice or something like that, or crazy stuff. It
gets around Rule of Laws, too.
Yeah, Rule of Laws. It's actually very good to go grab win cons with. Yeah. And that's what I think was the overlooked part of Step Through. This thing was so low. It was so low. It wasn't underhyped. It just wasn't on a radar at all. No one was even looking at the card.
Yeah, it's you can't underestimate the ability for. So let's just talk about the Najila example, right? You've been building a bit of a board state. You're not really doing a ton, and the posturing in CEDH, the ability to present yourself as not scary until the very last minute, is often just so undervalued. And the ability to go, okay, I'm going to hold up some interaction, or say some of my favorite words in CEDH. I'm just going to play it safe and I'll pass. And
famous last words before you lost the game.
And so you sit there with your tutor in your hand and you're like, all right, your opponents aren't going off because they're like, oh, he's probably holding up interaction. And then last minute you go, oop, get my Derevi and untap, play it. Hey, there we go.
Oh, look at that. Did I just win? Oh, how about that? That's crazy. How about that?
But yeah, I think it's a powerful card. Gives it right to hand, plays around Rule of Law, plays around any sort of counter magic. Now, obviously, they can always counter what you play. But for something like Derevi, that's you can't counter creature spells with a lot of the things we've been saying, as we've mentioned a couple times in this conversation already. Countering creatures is real hard. There are many decks in this format, and I don't use many lightly here, but there are legitimately many decks in this format that have just Force of Will and Pact of Negation as ways to counter it. Some of them just have Force of Will. And that's insane. It's definitely it's just cool to see such a unique card and one that you really just plays on a different axis than a lot of people expect. And to everyone at home hearing this conversation today, if you think that there are any cards that we missed in this conversation, we would love to hear your comments down below on this video, because Modern Horizons 2 was a big set with many different cards. And I know for a fact we didn't cover everything that was CEDH playable. We just covered the stuff we really wanted to talk about. And, was there anything that you were really excited about from this set that underperformed? Were there things that you were super hyped about that didn't do well, things that you were really low on that you're like, oh man, that's a play? What? Any of that stuff, we'd love to hear about it, because these conversations can be so fun, so engaging. And as you can hear from Ryan and I speaking, this is all just us getting so excited about these cards in this game.
All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and start to wrap it up. So really big thanks to our sponsors again. That is TCG Player, that is Dragon Shield, and support from viewers like you and listeners like you over on Patreon. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and give us a comment, like the video, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Also, if you're listening to us on the road or on your commute or on your lunch break, give us a review on things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your aggregator is. That's also going to be a big help for us. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook. Just follow the links in the description below, or go into the search bar and type in Playing with Power MTG.
And if you'd like to hear a little more from me personally, you heard this episode and you were like, hey, that Ian guy had a few not so bad points. You can go over to my YouTube channel, my personal channel, youtube.com/comedianmtg. I do stuff like top 4 breakdowns, commentary on live games, had a ton of stuff from the recent Tier 1 con, do some deck techs on the cool decks of the format, some stuff I've been brewing. If you want to hear more from the guy who made Winota, you can check that channel out there. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.